welcome to another episode of the Prescription for Better Living podcast. As always, I'm Dr. Hernando Carter, your board certified internal medicine physician. Yes, your primary care extraordinaire. And welcome to the Prescription for Better Living podcast, where our goal is to discuss all things health and wellness in a hip and relatable way. We want to increase the quality and longevity of life for people in our community. So, on our last episode, we introduced the concept of healthcare disparities. And as a topic, we defined broadly what healthcare disparities are. We gave some real world examples of healthcare disparities and how they have impacted individuals. And then we started diving into how healthcare disparities have taken root in our country and some of the systemic things that have existed in years past that have really perpetuated these healthcare disparities. So, if you want to catch up on that, I encourage you to check out the previous episode because we got a lot to cover and we have to move forward. But again, broadly speaking, a healthcare disparity is a difference that exists in healthcare outcomes when you make all of the things equal. So you control for things like education level, for income level, for zip code, and there is still a difference in healthcare outcomes based on race. We talked about how you can have someone who is well educated with a terminal degree, who has money in the bank, who has financial resources, who live in a good neighborhood, but they can still experience a worse health care outcome than their white counterparts if that person is black and the counterpart with all of the other socioeconomic factors being the same, the only difference being race. You can have desperate outcomes. And we are really diving into why that is. So I thought on this episode, it would be a really good idea to talk to you about possibilities, the possibility of what could have been. We have a shortage of physicians in this country. I've told you that in other episodes. But what's even more alarming is we have an even worse shortage of physicians and healthcare providers of color. Yes, we are missing tens of thousands of Black men and women who are supposed to be doctors to this day. Well, what is the root of that, Hernando? I'm glad you asked. To get into the root of that, I need to introduce someone to you. This person is named Abraham Flexner, Flexner. Abraham Flexner was born November 13th, 1866, in Kentucky. He died September 21st, 1959, and he was known as an American educator. He is best known for his role in reforming 20th century higher education, colleges and universities, and medical schools. So, to tell you a little bit about Mr. Flexner, he graduated from Johns Hopkins University with a BA degree in classics, and he did some graduate studies at Harvard University and University of Berlin, but he did not finish there. He didn't graduate with graduate degrees. He went on and he did what we call experimental schooling. In his experimental schooling, he opened a private school and he did things that were considered unconventional. He didn't really have a formalized curriculum as you would in a traditional grade school. He encouraged students to work in small groups. He really didn't administer tests or exams, and he didn't give traditional grades like letter grades. And after a few years of this, graduates of his school went on to be admitted to some of the most prestigious colleges and universities. And so he caught a lot of people's attention. He also contributed to a lot of scholarly works as it relates to the American education system. And he had a huge impact on education, higher education in this country and also in Canada. So, the American Medical Association enlisted the help of Mr. Flexner. Medical education at the time was not very standardized, if you will. And a lot of people in organized medicine were concerned that the lack of standardization could really degrade the quality of medical education in our country. And so they elicited the help of Mr. Flexner. Mr. Flexner studied medical colleges all around this country, and he wrote what is known as the Flexner Report, Flexner report. And it was published in 1910. So the Flexner Report and Mr. Abraham Flexner is credited for really standardizing our medical education. He is credited for the very robust, the very respected medical education system in our country. And he's given a lot of credit for the work that he did. But that's not really what I'm going to do today. I'm going to tell you about dreams deferred and opportunities assassinated. Before Mr. Flexner published his self titled Flexner Report in 1910, there were over 20 medical schools that were dedicated to educating and graduating Black physicians. Over 20. After the publication of the Flexner Report, those 20 dropped to two. Those two remaining medical schools dedicated to educating, training, and graduating Black physicians that remained after the Flexner Report were Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and Howard University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C. We went from over 20 to two. Well, what impact did that have, Hernando? I'm glad you asked. Think about the number of students who lost an opportunity to go to medical school after the number of medical schools dropped from 20 to 2. Think about the communities that missed out on black doctors. Think about the generations of doctors that those doctors would have trained, and then the next generation would have trained, and then the next generation would have trained, and the next generation would have trained. What happens to a dream deferred, or in this case, just dreams that were erased? Well, we have a shortage of doctors in this country, and we have a shortage of black doctors. Well, how did the publication of the Flexner report lead to the closure of over 18 historically black medical schools? Well, I'll tell you how. Mr. Flexner, in his studies, again, traveled all around the country, and he wanted one standard. And he based that standard off of Johns Hopkins University. Excellent medical school, excellent hospital. Johns Hopkins University had a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources. And so Mr. Flexner said that every medical school should be able to upgrade their facilities, their buildings, their labs, etc., their equipment, all of that, to reach the standard of Johns Hopkins University. Now, I want you to think about education today. Think about the historically black colleges and universities that exist today. I'm an alum of an HBCU, Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Graduated some powerful men that have made an impact on our country. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson, Dr. David Satcher, former Surgeon General, products of historically black colleges and universities. And you can go and look at the graduation rolls of pretty much all of the HBCUs in our country, and you will find that caliber of graduate from all of them. But there are differences that exist between a Morehouse or a Xavier University or a Fisk or a Tuskegee or even a Howard University, and let's say a Harvard or Johns Hopkins, and it's called an endowment. Their endowments are much larger than the HBCUs that exist today. But does that really speak to the quality of education received at an HBCU when compared to, let's say, an Ivy League school? Of course, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, many a Morehouse man have graduated from Morehouse College and gone on to the Harvards and the Hopkins and the Yales and excelled, made their name and staked their claim there. Well, but Mr. Flexner said that all of these, and it wasn't just the historically black medical colleges, there were a lot of other medical colleges, rural medical colleges, that didn't have the finances, the endowment to improve their facilities to compare to a Harvard or a Johns Hopkins. Also, they had recommendations on certain curricula that you had to follow. They wanted to standardize the curriculum. And I'm not just talking about subject matter covered, but the way in which you teach that subject matter. Sometimes the way that you teach the subject matter requires certain resources. Sometimes there are a certain number of specialists or doctors that are needed for a ratio per students. And the schools back then just didn't have that. So after this report was released, there were two historically black medical schools left standing, Meharry and Howard. And boy, did they train some powerhouse physicians over the years. Absolutely. Even still today, they stand and they train generation after generation of doctor. Did you know that in our state of Alabama, before integration, brilliant African Americans from Alabama were not permitted to attend medical school in the state of Alabama. And our state paid Meharry and Howard to educate those physicians. So thank God for Meharry Medical College and Howard University School of Medicine. But only two remained. And the fallout from that was that we could not educate enough black physicians to fill the need in this country. We couldn't do it. Well, why are you bringing that up, Hernando? I'm glad you asked. We'll get into it in future episodes, but there was a study published, a very strong study, that showed that when you pair a black patient with a black physician, their health outcomes increase, they improve exponentially. In this study, they looked at the recommendation of preventative services like vaccinations, cancer screenings. And when they paired a black patient with a black physician, as opposed to pairing a black patient with a white physician, what they found was that the patient that was paired with the black physician accepted the preventative medical services at a rate over 30% higher than the black patient that was paired with the white physician. Why is that, Hernando? I'm glad you asked. There's a lot more to medicine and to healthcare than just the science. The science is important, it's at the foundation of what we do, but there's something called the art of medicine. There is an important variable in medicine when you have to connect with your patient, and your patient has to trust you. If your patient does not trust you, they won't listen to your recommendations. They may not take the vaccination. They may not take the medication. They may not get the prostate screening done or the mammogram done or the colonoscopy done. If you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. Even to this day, we get vaccinated at lower rates. To this day, we get screened at lower rates, but we're diagnosed with more advanced disease than other races. I have often encountered patients who come to see me for the first time, and I go down the list. Have you had your prostate cancer screening? No. Have you had your mammogram? No. Have you had your colonoscopy? No. Why not? I don't trust it. But then I take the time to explain to them the screening test, why we should do it, the importance of it, and the uptake is higher. I once had a patient tell me no for a certain screening test, and we had a conversation, and eventually he did it. And then in retrospect, he came back and told me, "Doc, you know why I did the test?" And I said, "No, I just figured we talked about it and you understood it more." And he was like, "No, mm-mm." He said, "When you asked me about the test, I said no." And he said, "You didn't fuss at me. You didn't preach at me. You didn't judge me. You didn't argue with me. You just asked me, well, why not? Why don't you want to do it? And you listened to my reason. And you did not make me feel silly or dumb for my reason. You told me you understood my concerns. And then you walked me through the pros and the cons of the test. And then everything that I told you, you told me why I didn't have to worry about this, or yes, that's valid, but here are the steps we take to protect against that." He said, "You didn't talk at me, doc. You talked to me. You talked with me. You had a conversation. And before we got to that, doc, you had asked me just about who I am, where I'm from, where I went to school. Tell me about your family. Are you married? How many children? Tell me more, tell me more." And it made me feel like you were interested in what I had to say. And it was at that moment, doc, that I determined that you were all right and I could trust you. That is why. It is the ability to identify with someone, to see them as a person and not just as a patient, not just see them as a stubborn, non-compliant patient who just doesn't want to do anything or who just wants to say no. They're at the doctor. People who don't care about their health, people who don't care whether they live or die, don't go to the doctor. They avoid the doctor. So if someone is saying no to a recommended test or a recommended treatment and they're saying no is not in their best interest, it's potentially placing them in harm's way, the logical question to ask is, why don't you want to do it? Do you want to live? Yeah, long life. Well, why? Why don't you want to do it? But I've had more patients at my first visit with them when I listen to their heart and lungs and I look in their ears and I rub and feel for their lymph nodes and I push on their stomach. I feel the pulses in their feet to make sure their circulation is okay. Look in their mouth and their eyes. It's a standard exam, nothing extravagant. They say, "Wow, doc, My other doctors never touched me. What do you mean they never touched you? No. I walk in the room and they're looking at the chart or they're looking on the laptop and they ask me some questions. They order some lab work and they give me a prescription, but they never touch me. And this has been told to me so many times that it can't be a coincidence. Too many times over the years. I've been practicing over 15 years. And it's been told to me more than 15 times. Do you know I've had people to come in with infections and they tell me, here's the infection. And I raise up their shirt and I actually look at it and I see what's going on. And I say, well, what did they say when they saw this? Well, they didn't do what you did, Doc. I just told them what was going on. They never even really crossed the threshold of the door. They didn't come near me. They just prescribed me some antibiotics. So that is why when you pair a patient, a Black patient, with someone of similar background, they're more likely to have better outcomes because the trust factor is there. And this is what the Flexner report took away from our people. Now, healthcare disparities are complex organisms, and there's not one singular cause, and there's not one singular cure. That's not what I am insinuating here. There are things called the social determinants of health that play a role in health disparities. But the social determinants of health, as you will see in future episodes, are connected to systemic racism in our country. Did you know that you're in Birmingham, Alabama, and you live in zip code 35211, as opposed to, let's say, zip code 35242 or 35208? Your life expectancy is shorter. That is a social determinant of health. And we're going to get into that, y'all. We're going to get into how, after the murder of George Floyd, there was an awakening in our country for a brief period of time where we seemed like we were going to really face head on racism in medicine and the role that race plays in health disparities. It seemed like we were heading there. But we had a Supreme Court decision that said that affirmative action was not legal. And then states started going after diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And all of a sudden, the word diversity was a bad word. It was a curse word. Equity was a bad word. Inclusion was a bad word. We don't want inclusiveness in my state. And so my fear is that we will regress and lose the very minuscule amount of progress that we made. So we're going to get into all that, y'all, in future episodes. But This has been another episode of the Prescription for Better Living podcast. If this episode spoke to you, if you found it impactful, if you heard something you didn't know, you found it beneficial, I need you to do a few things for me. I need you to like the video. I need you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. I need you to stand on the tallest building you can. Share the good news of the Prescription for Better Living podcast and tell everyone you know, hallelujah, Dr. Carter is here. Until next time, Dr. Carter saying, peace.